1. This happened Halloween night, and I wasn't even on the clock. With none of the usual Halloween excitement and parties going on, I opted to treat my aunt to a night at the hotel, which funnily enough makes her the first family member that's seen where I've been working for almost 2 years now. And we aren't even that close. The plan had been to stay up late watching spooky movies on the projector that we have set up, playing silent horror flicks in the lobby, so I could also be available for the new girl, AC. Since this would be her first end-of-the-month night audit. However, my aunt ended up falling asleep by the time AC showed up for her shift. This was fine by me. I was still trying to get all my drawings finished for Inktober, so I just set up a little workstation on one of the tables in the lobby, on my own, and did my own thing. That seemed to work out well. I was getting my art finished, AC came over now and again with little questions, and night audit and end-of-the-month processes were completed without incident. At about midnight, a wedding party returned from their festivities, and it would be about another half an hour before things started getting interesting. At about 1 a.m., the phone at the front desk started ringing. AC had gone into the back to get something, so she wasn't there to answer it. I wasn't on the clock, so I certainly wasn't jumping to answer it. In fact, I had to go to the bathroom, so I did, leaving the phone to ring because for once it wasn't my responsibility. Glorious. Well, by the time I left the bathroom, AC was back at the desk and had a look on her face. I went over to make sure everything was all right, and she explained that a woman, Brunhilde, had come down and was pissed, claiming she'd been calling for 20 minutes without being able to get through, that she had a noise complaint. She demanded that AC call the room to yell at them for it. Mind you, this alleged 20 minutes of calling and the trip down to the front desk had all transpired in the less than 5 minutes that I had been in the bathroom. So AC apologized for the inconvenience and, since we had 2 vacant rooms still available, was able to offer to relocate her to a spot where the noise wouldn't disturb her. Oh no, Brunhilde didn't want to move. All she cared about was making sure that AC yelled at the other room and made them be quiet. AC called the room that the noise was coming from, which was one of the rooms from the wedding party, and apparently they were a little irritated that, because not only were they not being wild crazy drunks, like the complaining guest claimed, they were actually trying to get their kids to bed after the wedding festivities. And it was 1 a.m. by that point. Since the portion of the wedding party that was still partying had taken up residence in the lobby, this sounded reasonable. AC was fretting over disturbing them while simultaneously wondering if she'd done enough to appease Brunhilde. Right away, I was getting that red flag vibe from her. I hadn't even seen this woman or spoken to her, but I could tell that she was going to be trouble based on AC's description. I assured her that she'd done a good job handling the situation, went back to my little drawing station, leaving her to finish the paperwork. 20 minutes later, an older woman stepped off the elevator with 2 more on her flanks, and they looked ready for battle. I knew as soon as I laid eyes on them that this would be the Queen Bee. I wanted to keep out of it since I wasn't on the clock, but also kept watch to make sure AC was alright dealing with the situation. She hits the counter, and was already using a loud, snippy voice. She didn't start off yelling, but was squeaking loud enough that I could hear her pretty clearly, from almost 30 feet away, even with her mask on. According to her, it was absolutely unacceptable that the people above her were partying, and she wanted to know if AC had called them and exactly what the conversation had been. When AC explained that she'd been told they were trying to get ready for bed when she'd called 20 minutes prior, Brunhilde dialed the accusation back. Well, maybe they weren't partying, but they were certainly stomping back and forth at a volume that was simply unacceptable. So what was AC going to do about it? She apologized once again for the disturbance, and reiterated her offer to move the trio to a different room. Nope. Brunhilde was not down with that idea. She was a loyal brand member. Investigated after the fact and found out she was literally a bottom-tier new brand member, and demanded that AC call the room right back up, to insist that they stop stomping around. AC wasn't comfortable calling the room, trying to get kids to sleep, again at almost 1:30 in the morning, and B was getting progressively louder, actively bullying a new girl right before my eyes, as she tried to dictate exactly how this situation was going to go down. AC was going to give her the room number. That's a no. AC was going to call them right now while the bee posse stood at the front desk and watched the conversation. Nope. Well, AC clearly didn't know what she was doing. She needed to get a supervisor or someone who knew more than she did on the phone right now. When Brunhilde demanded to know the names of the guests in the room above her, I hit my limit and got out of my seat. This was not an ordeal I was keen on getting mixed up in, but I could see that AC was struggling with weathering her first Category 3 carrying cane. I'm not going to lie, it did feel kind of epic as I stepped up behind this fussy trio and announced that AC would not be giving out that information or calling up to harass the other room at 1:30 a.m. just to put a show on for them. Cue the Queen Bee's head whipping around like something out of The Exorcist, and her volume raising about 10 notches as she demanded to know just who the hell I was and why the hell I was intruding on this conversation. Epic feeling gone, replaced with instant regret. I did not want to be involved in this, especially since I was also realizing that I'm still dressed up like a Halloween nerd, with a derpy little top hat. Not at all professional looking, and this woman was straight up screaming at me. Shit, what did I just jump into? Too late to turn back now. I explained that I was a more experienced night auditor who worked at the hotel, that I overheard the issue and felt it was necessary to intervene. I informed her that AC was doing what she could to address their problem, and pointed out that she had offered to relocate them multiple times before, explaining that we weren't going to disturb guests who were trying to put their children to bed just because they were walking around their room, which they had every right to do. At this point, all three of them were yelling at me about how terrible the service was, and they were going to call corporate about this, yada yada. It was a legit Halloween nightmare, and I was starting to see red. Maybe it was a full moon. So when Brunhilde snapped at me that this was the worst customer service she'd ever received, I clapped back with, "Well, you're about the rudest guest I've ever had the misfortune of dealing with here, so maybe that's a you problem." She looked like I'd slapped her when I said it, and after snatching up a business card with a promise to let corporate know all about how we treat our guests, she stormed out the door. I was literally shaking at that point, and had to take a breath. That feeling of regret was building up as I started to worry that I may have been the one in the wrong, for not only approaching the situation while not on the clock, but also insulting a real bee of a guest. Once I got my thoughts straight, I suggested that AC go stand outside the room that was allegedly noisy, just to cover our bases and make sure they weren't jumping around and causing a legitimate disturbance, while I slumped back to my corner to mull over everything that happened. I was still fairly certain that our supportive management team would back me, but since this had happened while I was off the clock, there was still an uneasy fog of doubt there too. A few minutes later, the group came back in, and, for the sake of being professional, I met them back at the front desk after taking off the goofy top hat, to apologize for jumping into the conversation unannounced, and explain that we were taking a few extra measures to look into the matter. It was my first time witnessing that sadistic twinkle in a Karen's eyes when she thinks she's gained the upper hand. It absolutely turned my stomach, but I sucked it up and put on a cheerful expression, doing my best to make amends. AC came back to announce that there was no noise coming from the room in question. She offered to move them to another room one last time, and once again, Brunhilde refused and tried to use what she thought was her newfound advantage to force AC to call them again. When we said no, she made a big show of writing our names down on the manager's business card, while letting us know that she was going to be reporting all of this. She even gave AC one last chance to make the call. Seriously? At this point, I really just wanted to tell her to fuck off, but I had that customer service mask firmly in place by now, and wasn't going to let it slip again. AC handled it like a champ, reminding her that she wasn't able to do that, and offering her group a free breakfast since our restaurant is actually making hot breakfast still, in an effort to make up for the issues she'd experienced. B, having none of it, snatched her card off the desk and stormed back down the hall to the elevator. Needless to say, as soon as she was gone, I sat down and wrote out a detailed explanation of everything that had transpired, and told AC that while this technically wasn't a requirement for the job, I recommended putting it down in writing whenever there was a customer complaint, and how it was addressed, and it was especially important to do so in an extreme situation like this, to provide our side of the story when a guest threatens to go to corporate. After that I was burned out, so I packed up my things and went up to my room to pass out. The next morning the front desk manager was working, so when I got up, I went straight down to talk to her about what happened. She said that Queen Bee had come to the front desk earlier that day, and that she was crazy. Front desk manager had already read my report by the time the woman got there, but played it off like she didn't know what was happening, and let her explain it in her own words. Once she got out her side, the front desk manager pointed out that she had already been informed of the situation and that, as far as she could tell, we handled the situation exactly how we were supposed to. This pissed Brunhilde right off, who immediately puffed up and accused the front desk manager of taking attitude with me too, going off about how she's worked her whole life in customer service, and this wasn't how people got treated, etc. Front desk manager was having none of it, pointing out that she's worked in hospitality for 2 decades, and that refusing our reasonable accommodations for her disturbance issue did not mean that she got to treat us that way or demand personal information of other guests. She also let her know that she had already taken the liberty of reaching out to her customer service corporate line to let them know all about the issue we've had with her reservation and treatment of staff. God, what I would give to have been a fly on the wall when she heard that. Apparently it knocked her down several pegs, and she started backpedaling. Well, maybe she'd overreacted, just a bit, but she certainly wasn't as rude as we accused her of being, and she didn't scream at us, yada yada. Whatever, you lying bee. And so the mighty Brunhilde was slain at last by our awesome front desk manager, put right back in her place where she belonged. Front desk manager assured me that I handled the situation perfectly, that she trusted my ability to handle crazes like that, and that she appreciates what I do for the hotel. I know this story has become rather long-winded. Just imagine my write-up about the incident. But if anyone is still listening, I appreciate you. I was just really tickled by the fact that someone so nasty wound up being put in her place twice over, and felt validated by a manager's response to the situation, so I had to share. Update. The B-shift co-worker told me tonight that the front desk manager actually did tell corporate that she was blacklisting Queen Bee from returning to our property. I was kind of shocked because in almost 2 years of working there, I legit thought that we were just really laid back and didn't have a DNR list. It's good to know that the bee won't be back, though. 2. So there I was. I happened to be working the PM shift this day. I'm a bit of a weirdo in that I work morning, evening, and night regularly. Not many arrivals today, but the PM shifter knows that a number of arrivals doesn't equate how busy a day is. Around 4 PM, an elderly man comes and talks to me. I wish I could tell you what he was telling me, something about buying land and property? But I couldn't understand him. My GM hadn't left yet, so I snagged him and asked for help. He spoke with the gentleman, but didn't get anything out of it. The man returned down the hallway, from whence he came. I check some more people in, the staff leaves, and I'm left alone. Sometime around 5:30ish, a little girl comes and says that the key to her room on the first floor wasn't working. No worries, her family had been over here a week and had extended their stay, so I figured the keys just expired. I got her a new set of keys and that was that. Only it wasn't. She came back a minute later and said the keys still didn't work. Odd, but not unheard of. I get her some new keys and send her on her way. As she leaves, the phone rings and I answer it. It was my GM. He told me to look at my local police's Facebook page. I do, and lo and behold, the newest post is about a missing person. The same old man we spoke with earlier. If I'd never gotten my GM involved, I'd never have known. So I call the police and give them an update that I saw the man in our hotel. They thanked me and said they'll send an officer over on their way to get more info. Almost right as I put the phone down, the girl's mother comes storming out of the hallway and yells, "There's someone in my room!" I look at her and she continues with, "He bolted the door shut!" I rush down and press my key to the door. It doesn't open. I pound on the door to tell the person inside to open the door. The family has conjoined rooms, and the person inside had bolted both doors. He comes and has trouble opening the door. I have to instruct him how to unbolt it. He opens the door, and it's the man from before. The family isn't all too innocent. They left their doors open all the time. No matter how much the mother professed she specifically shut the doors, I knew she was lying. She had left the doors open, and this senile old man had just walked right in. I just saw that he was going through her wallet and bag, so I had him drop those and come with me. As I'm leading him to the front desk, he really appears to be out of it, not drunk, just old and suffering from severe dementia. I call the police again and say that I have him with me, and I need police right away. Our hotel has a contact with an airline, and I had 4 pilots waiting at the front desk to be checked in. I frantically get them the sheet to sign in, all the while keeping the old man with me. Cops show up and instantly recognize him. All the while the mother is yelling at me because it's my fault that she left the door open. There's a line waiting to be checked in. I'm answering questions from the officer, and now her husband called, and is yelling at me on the phone. Needless to say, it was a very intense 30 minutes. I've since called my manager and gotten him to come to the hotel, but when he arrived, I'd already taken care of everything. The woman had retired to her rooms, but the best part is that once again she had her doors propped open. Then her husband gets to the hotel and yells at me all over again. He then proclaims to everyone in line what would have happened if his wife had been raped and whatnot. Of course he's going to believe his wife, that she closed the door, and I honestly don't blame him. This is a scary thing, and he had a right to be upset. He has a chat with my GM, and he leaves. So I had solved a missing persons case and got yelled at for it. Understandable, in this case. But the officers thanked me and returned him to the senior home from which he made his daring escape. The rest of the night continues as normal. But since you're still here, here's a bonus for you. Later this night at around 9 or 10 o'clock, I get a call from the husband. Only he's not mad anymore. His TV isn't working. It wasn't too busy, so I go to the room, still propped open, and go in to fix the TV. Husband comes out wearing nothing but his underwear, and then he just sits on the bed and watches me work. I went home very tired that night. 3. I have fond memories of a time when the economy was booming, and recruiters were actively trying to hire even high school students, away to resource industry jobs, where they'd often pay $15 to $20 to start, no experience required. Jobs were everywhere, and it was competitive enough that an extra 25 cents an hour was often enough to entice someone away. It was a warm midsummer day, things were running smoothly, and to be honest, I was a bit bored. My GM took a hint and decided to dispatch me to our soon-to-be-open sister location the town over for his hiring day, where I joined the front desk manager and the AGM, who was going to be the GM of the new location, and the one ultimately making the hiring decisions. We had ads posted inviting all applicants. Our GM's philosophy is you can train almost anything. It's all about finding the right people. That being said, we couldn't compete on pay, and we knew our main strength was in being able to offer part-time work around employees' other commitments, and that college students and moms wanting a daytime job when the kids were at school were 2 of our main target groups. My job that day was twofold: to be available to talk to potential applicants, but also to do screening interviews with those who were looking for any job to try to identify 1 or 2 areas of interest or potential best fit their availability, and to offer my thoughts on whether or not I could see that person as a colleague. Enter Mom and her teenage son.
Hi, you guys are hiring for all positions, right?
We sure are. Well, we do have a GM already, but pretty much every other position is open, and for the right candidate, we can provide training. Was there any position you had in mind? I can walk you through the different positions we have available if you like.
Oh, my son here is looking for a job. Perhaps you might have something for him.
She gestures to her son. I point at my name tag. Hi, I'm Race Turtle. Pleasure to meet you. I extend my hand out to the son for a handshake. He looks down, then to his mother's gesturing, and offers a limp handshake.
His name sits with a controller. He hasn't had a job before, but I'm sure we can make it work.
Huh? We've all got to start somewhere, and the GM for this location herself started her career when she was in high school and made her way up to AGM at our next town location. So maybe we're looking at one of our future GMs here. I gesture to a table and chairs. Perhaps we can sit down and talk, and please help yourself to some refreshments first if you'd like. We had a table with coffee, juice, and cookies. Mom sits down while son reluctantly slouches. Did you bring a copy of your resume? Sits with the controller.
He doesn't have one. I hope that's not an issue.
That's alright. We also have these application forms. You can fill out the top part with your contact details, and we can talk. And I can fill in the rest, if that's easier.
Okay.
The son fills in his name, address, and email. Excellent. Would you like to tell me about yourself and why you'd like to join our team? Silence.
Don't be shy now.
He crosses his arms.
My mom told me to get a job and brought me here.
Okay. Did you have any positions in mind?
No.
Perhaps you can tell me more about yourself and we can try to narrow things down.
He's 17 and he's a senior at a local secondary school.
Alright. Would you like to tell me about school, any special accomplishments or projects that you might have done? They both sit silent. How are your grades?
C's.
What about extracurriculars? Are you in any sports, clubs, or associations, in or out of school?
Nope.
What do you do in your spare time?
I play games.
What type of games?
Mostly shooting games.
I look down at the mostly blank form, pen hovering over the skills section. Do you play on teams or on your own?
On my own?
Darn, can't even attempt to put teamwork down. Would you say you have good hand-eye coordination, perhaps?
I don't know.
How about we put that down so we have something?
Okay.
Do you do anything else?
No.
So solo shooting games are the only thing you do when you're home from school and on weekends?
Yep.
I give up on the skills section and move to references. Do you have anyone who could serve as a reference? Maybe a teacher or someone in the community? Like a neighbor you might have helped, a leader in a club or a group you were in, even in the past, or someone in a church group who might know you well.
I don't know anyone.
You can put me down.
She reaches into her purse, pulls out and unfolds a piece of paper.
Here's my resume. I'm looking for a daytime job. I can do housekeeping or serve in a restaurant. I've done both before. Have lots of experience and will do anything. You said you're opening in August? School's not back in yet. If you hire me, I can bring my son to work with me.
I'll make a note of that.
Great, is that it?
Our GM will be in touch if she thinks there might be a good fit. Mom and son get up and leave. Mom looks optimistic, while son looks relieved that it's over. I look at my AGM and she nods in agreement, as I first hover over and then drop both applications into the not recommended pile. 4. I work in a hotel. We're not the richest hotel by far, but we are part of a larger chain. With the current situation going on in the world, my hotel is very limited on what we can offer for breakfast. Our local health department will not allow us to do our famous hot breakfast until the number of new cases in my area decreases. This means that we can only offer grab-and-go items, nothing heated. We're also not allowed to open up our dining room, not enough space for social distancing. What we are allowed to serve are things that can be taken back to the room and eaten cold or heated in the microwave. But we are not allowed to have anything that would cause people to hang out in the area. New player, enter Karen and her husband. Now, Karen had already been a bit of a troublemaker. We are a 3-star hotel, and will go out of our way to help a guest. But Karen is one of those that no matter how far out of your way you go, she still isn't satisfied. When she first checked in, she cussed out my front desk staff. Don't we offer valet parking? Just to give you an idea of her entitlement. Mind you, none of the hotels in my chain offer valet parking at my hotel's level. Back to the main story. Now for breakfast, my hotel offers a box of items that can be grabbed and taken to the guest's room, or eaten cold in the car. In the box is a bagel, 2 hard-boiled eggs, a breakfast bar, cream cheese, and yogurt, as well as eating utensils. We have signs all over our dining area that state due to the current pandemic we are not allowed to open the dining tables. Karen and her husband each take a box. Upon pulling out the bagel, Karen comes to my desk.
You need to give me a toaster for this bagel.
I am sorry, but we do not have any toasters available.
Then how am I supposed to eat my bagel?
Ma'am, there's microwaves available in the guest rooms, or if you're heading out, I will be more than happy to heat it in my little microwave in my office. Karen didn't like either of those options and huffed back to the breakfast area where her husband was waiting. I figured they were leaving, and that's why he was waiting. I walk over a little bit later to clean and check to make sure there were enough boxes for all the guests, when I see Karen and her husband sitting in the dining area. Now, one could assume they didn't see the signs, however, they sat at one of the tables that had the sign on it. I do apologize, but per CDC and local health department regulations, we are not allowed to have anyone in the dining area.
There's no sign anywhere?
I point to the large print sign on the table. Ma'am, we have them posted on the entrance door, as well as on the tables right here.
Well, I'm not moving until I finish eating.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but you will have to. If the health department sees you here, we can be shut down as a public health nuisance.
Let's just take our things back to the room, says the husband.
No, this little a-hole is lying. There are no rules that say we can't eat here. He just doesn't want anyone here.
I step off and go to the back. I come back with a printout of the CDC and local health department regulations. Ma'am, these are the rules as outlined by the CDC and health department. As you can see, it says right here, pointing to the page, it states that eating areas must be able to accommodate social distancing to open. As this is a small dining area that cannot accommodate social distancing, we are unable to open it. Karen goes ballistic, yelling and cussing. I finally get tired of listening to it. Ma'am, if you're going to continue to yell and use foul language, I'm afraid that I will have to ask you to leave the property, without a refund. This is when Karen says the magic words,
"Get me your manager."
I get a little glee when I hear Karen say this, as I am the assistant GM at my hotel, and generally at breakfast time the only employee here. I point to my name badge. Ma'am, I am the manager, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave the hotel. Don't worry about a receipt, it will be emailed to the email on your reservation.
I can't believe we're getting kicked out of another place because of your attitude.
Karen's husband had to drag her out of the hotel. 5. I walked out of my morning shift today, and I've never been happier. Context. I've been with this management company for a year, sticking with them through COVID, working at 2 different properties. I consider myself a good employee. I show up on time, I do what I'm supposed to do, and I go home. Pretty simple. My GM is also GM at 2 other properties in the company's portfolio. Plus, he's pretty buddy-buddy with the owner. He's never around and tells us not to call him in the morning or evening because he's with the baby. He has a newborn, fair enough, I don't know. My FOM does a semi-decent job, but is definitely doing some sketchy stuff on the side, as you'll see later. Me and the other front desk girl, T, are reliable, good employees, plus our audit staff, God bless them. But we've had trouble hiring quality people lately. None of them seem to work out. Also, there's a couple in 403 that's involved in some domestic dispute bullshit, screaming and locking each other out of the room, etc. Checked in last night, and has been nothing but a disturbance since. Story. Anyway, I just got back from vacation, and this morning was my first shift back, let me tell you. I wasn't expecting a cakewalk or anything, but I walked into an absolute shit show of epic proportions. The first thing was I noticed there was a handy-dandy super sneaky schedule change, which they do all the time and never announce. I was supposed to be off next weekend, but now I'm working it and they didn't bother to tell me. This in itself isn't a problem. I know hospitality means working weekends. I've been doing front desk for a while, so I get it. I'm not above working weekends, but they had promised me the 13th and 14th off, and had even posted and sent me a schedule to reflect that, before changing it behind my back and not bothering to mention it to me. It just rubbed me the wrong way. Whatever. I let it go and proceed to clock in. When I get to the time clock, I notice a set of brand new rules for the front desk posted next to the time clock. As I'm reading, the first few make sense. No sitting down in front of guests, no cell phones when people are in the lobby, etc., just basic stuff. Then I see the next few rules. No eating after you clock in. Is that even allowed? Front desk is expected to help cook breakfast. I'm sorry, please tell me if I'm being naive here, but I've worked at 2 other Smilton properties, and I've never heard of front desk cleaning bathrooms and cooking breakfast. We have breakfast staff and a cleaning person specifically for those tasks. It just seems redundant to redo what they're already being paid to do. Plus, I feel like I'm skipping out on my front desk responsibilities by scrubbing shit stains off the public toilets. I've got receipts to print, calls to take, and people to deal with. Granted, it's a pretty small property, but still. Okay, even this isn't enough to deter me at this point. I clock in and run my reports, and all the other morning stuff, and I'm looking over a high balance report. And I see there's balances on 5 different rooms, totaling almost $1,200. So, being away for a week, I figure they're guests of the owner or something, and their rooms are being comped and I just didn't hear about it. I don't know, I try to justify it. So I do some digging, and I notice there's no notation on the reservation or anywhere about being guests of the owner or their rooms being comped. Okay, so I go back and see who checked them in, and it was my FOM. She checked them in at 10:45 p.m. and she didn't collect payment of any kind. And there's no note. Sorry, that reeks to high heaven to me. She already gives me sketchy vibes, so this really sends me over the edge when it comes to her. Okay, it's fucking weird. And sounds like a headache. So I print everything out, including documentation that she was the one checking them in, and left it in my GM's mailbox. I'm not taking the heat for that one. The icing on the cake, right after I discovered this, I just happened to look over at my camera's monitor station thingy, and I see the crazy boyfriend standing outside of 403. He's been locked out again. Whoopsie. I zoom in because I'm kind of curious and a little amused at this point. He's sitting there quite literally twiddling his thumbs. He sits on the ground for about 2 to 3 minutes before she finally opens the door for him. He then proceeds to rear back and punch her in the face. Y'all, my jaw hits the fucking ground, and I immediately dial 911. Holy hell, this just shot way above my pay grade. Obviously you cannot see into the rooms from the camera, but you can see the hallway. I didn't see her on the camera, but I definitely caught him pulling his arm back and swinging. After I call the police, I immediately call my sketch as fuck FOM, and she answers the phone all pissed because she's at the gym right now. Bitch, I'm at the hotel right now and there's some shit going down. I tell her in no uncertain terms that she needs to stop what she's doing and come deal with this right away. I was absolutely not having it. While I'm on the phone with her, I hear them screaming on the elevator. They fought all the way down the hall from their room to the elevator, and now they're fighting as it's descending. And you can hear it reverberate through the elevator shaft. As soon as the door opens, he threatens to kill her and everyone around. This has gone from a domestic dispute to a direct threat to me and my guests. Hell to the no. They slip out the back door by the elevator and drive off in their car. Granted, they left all their stuff in the room, so I'm assuming they're planning on returning. That's not happening. I communicate all this to FOM, and I guess she finally understands the gravity of the situation. She pulls up about 10 minutes later, and the cop is right behind her. I give my statement to the cop, tell him what I know, and offer to rewind the tapes for him. He turns me down, and asks me to call my GM. I internally cringe inside because I know I'm going to get an ass chewing for calling him, but this is an emergency. I dial him, and as expected, he's rude and snippy. I explain the situation to him and then give the cop the phone. They talk for about 5 minutes, and then the cop comes back and gives me the phone. Your GM isn't pressing charges, he said, with a definite attitude, like I was wasting his precious time. It was at that moment that I realized nobody gave a shit about me as an employee there. I had no backup, no support, and I'm pretty sure my FOM was stealing thousands of dollars from the company. And I decided to not stick around for that. I turned to FOM and said, "You need to handle this," and walked out the front door. No job is worth that amount of bullshit, period. Let this be a lesson. If there's some bullshit going on, leave. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Coahw, episode 51. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. The final story there, I had a similar revelation myself after a number of managers and a number of years in my former job, and it really does suck when you realize that your spineless dick of a manager just doesn't support his employees. Brown-nosing company, man, sadly. And if he hadn't been that, as is the case with all managers, if they had their employees back, they generally find their businesses are much more successful, and that everybody's position is much more secure. But alas, that's too obvious, I suppose. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.